So my name is Dave Ehringer. I'm a technical director of platforms and products within the Enterprise Technology Services group at Liberty Mutual. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about our journey to go from commit to production in about 10 minutes. And I think really, before we even start off, emphasizing the journey aspect of it. It's something that's been something we've been working at for a long time, something that is definitely very difficult, not easy, but I think another thing is I'm going to be focusing a bit more on some of the technical aspects and a bit more of the aspects of how the technology enables some of the organizational and cultural transformation, but do want to emphasize that it's not just technology, and as you've been hearing as a very big theme here as part of this conference, the organizational and cultural transformations are just as important, if not more important, in enabling this type of thing. So, for those of you who have spent any amount of time in any type of large enterprise, you're kind of constantly have been facing those questions of, hey, this DevOps thing is great, but I have 15 different teams that I need to align with that seem like they have nothing to do with delivering this business value, but are somehow a stakeholder here. I have all these onerous security requirements that pop up and hit me, and how do I get my app out there and connected to the world? I have all these long change management processes that need to go through enterprise change management boards and have approval in weeks notice, and let alone all kind of the regulation and everything else that really is inherent in any type of industry that deals with customer data, and especially industries like finance and insurance. So I think one of the things, a lot of people just kind of look at this and say, hey, it's really not possible. These things we're seeing that these tech companies doing, and we're hearing from the Amazons and the Flickrs of the day and so on and so forth, doing these many production deployments a day, fast turnaround. It's just not possible for us. And I think one of the things that is really taking hold is understanding that everything that was just on that previous slide has really been built up over the years around managing risk, and managing risk in a traditional manner. And as we look at kind of the changing landscape that's affecting all industries, that the nature of the risk affecting the business is actually quite different. The nature of that risk is kind of the business being disrupted, the business disappearing, the business not being able to react fast enough and change fast enough. So not to say that some of those things aren't still important, but the nature of that risk is changing. So Liberty Mutual is a very large enterprise with over 50,000 employees across 30 countries, founded in 1912, so it's well over 100 years old. So we have a lot of those same things that have kind of been in place over the years. And also, I think one of the things is, as you look out and see kind of these stories of what people have done with continuous delivery and cloud, they've all really been focused on tech startups or the tech industry, but and especially kind of the thoughts around insurance are, hey, this is a big old industry, moves very slow. But I would say there's actually some really exciting things going on at Liberty, and it's actually a really exciting place to work. We kind of think of ourselves as the best kept tech secret. As you look at the things we've been doing with hackathons and contributions to open source, contributing some of our own projects to open source, and so on and so forth, it's actually a very exciting place to work. And I have to say that the speed and pace of change and everything going on is incredibly rapid. We definitely have scale that we operate with as well. So this is a slide just showing the data centers we run: 3 domestic data centers, 11 international data centers, and some of our major tech development hubs. This doesn't show some of our footprint within the public cloud across 5 different regions and a couple different public cloud providers. So there's definitely a lot of scale that we deal with here. So what we've been looking at and making our core focus in this space is, we need to enable and empower developers. If there's something in the way of the developer, it's not going to make them productive. It's not going to make them happy. We want happy developers, and we also want to be able to move fast. So how do we make moving fast basically a non-event? on a daily basis. And one of the goals that we have put out there is, even if we had a brand new developer come in on the first day, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to actually build an application and to deploy a real application into one of our cloud environments by the end of that first day. Certainly not something we're able to do today, but that is one of those audacious goals that we've put out there. And while we talk a lot about this, moving fast and so forth, security and acting responsibly are really foundational core things that we really can never give up. So protecting our customers' data is of utmost importance. So we can't really bend on anything that would ever put anything at risk. So what we're really trying to do is making the path of least resistance actually doing the right thing. So this is an example of a deployment that actually happened in the middle of the day. I went and just tried to grab some screenshots right before the presentation, and when I was looking them over, I realized this one actually took 14 minutes to go from commit to production, so sorry about that. And so I think there's a few things here. To production in 10 minutes in a lot of respects is really just kind of a vanity metric. It's optimally about how do you optimize that feedback cycle, and that feedback cycle can be at multiple levels. It's something as simple as developer getting feedback on the test they're writing, developer getting feedback from a CI integration, to your broader team getting feedback on are they doing the right thing, to get it in front of the customers and actually getting feedback from your actual customer base. So really, the thing that we're trying to optimize here is that cycle time for getting feedback. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the details behind kind of that pipeline in a minute. But if there's anything really here today that I would say is the most important, it would be that we've made continuous delivery pipelines the single path to introducing change into any environment. And this applies to all of our new cloud environments as we build out going forward, and especially into Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So it's been something that we've said, you must be this tall to ride this ride. It's something that we have not wavered on a bit, and it's probably been one of the most important things that we could have done to enable, to start to enable this transformation. And I think the other thing that's actually really important is you can't disconnect the way that you run stuff in the cloud from the way you build and deliver it into the cloud. So what we have looked at is building a holistic platform that encompasses both the build aspects, delivery pipelines, as well as the actual cloud environment. So we have a platform that we've been building up over the years, our delivery platform that we call Liberty Forge, and it encompasses everything from your product management tools, anything you would use to collect requirements, issue trackers, integrated within kind of your wiki spaces, service desks so you can interact with your customers, all your pipeline tools from version control through your pipelines, artifact repositories, and agile development tools, and also the elements of an internal open source community that kind of supports that. All as kind of an internal SaaS offering, so to speak. And when you look at ultimately what our product is to our developers is not them getting an account in Cloud Foundry. It's when they have a new app, we give them a pipeline. And then everything in terms of introducing change from that app goes through that pipeline. As we look at this, we've deployed PCF across 3 of our domestic data centers, and one AWS region will be going live in 2 additional regions. And across that, we've also have non-prod network segmentation. So we actually have a pretty decent footprint in kind of our infrastructure as we rolled this out. So what does this give us as we kind of go back to that first slide and we think about groups like audit and having to prove attestation and security? Having everything go through a continuous delivery pipeline gives you 100% visibility in everything end to end. And as you start to look at that integrated platform that includes build, delivery, and runtime, you have that traceability that can go the whole way back to some type of user story, any kind of code reviews, or pull request comments, or visibility into all the tests that run, and static analysis, and so on and so forth. That complete end-to-end view. So that is actually something that's very empowering when you go and you talk to a security person or you talk to an auditor, and it gives people trust in the process that you've put in place. And I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to be built up over time when you're talking about kind of deep ingrained cultures around managing risk by slowing everything down. To speed things back up, you need to have trust and complete transparency through that process, which you get through enforcing continuous delivery pipelines can help with that. You also really need to have what I call kind of a culture of safety and platforms that encourage safety. So platforms that can do things like blue-green deployments or canary-style deployments. You need to have tests, that can detect when things have diverged from the intended functionality and so on and so forth. But combined with that, those technical aspects, you really need a culture of safety. And what I mean by that, I've definitely seen it as a lot of these, practices and really from a technical perspective, platforms have been rolled out. People get kind of nervous when they start seeing how much transparency goes into everything they're doing on a daily basis. So as builds start failing, or maybe you have a failed deployment, there needs to be that culture of that's okay, that happens. We've built into the platforms a sense of safety so that it was a blue-green deployment, you've caused no outage. And without that culture of safety, everything can kind of come to a grinding halt. So there isn't anything really special here in kind of this pattern in terms of a continuous delivery process. But I mean, one thing we do is we do offer patterns. Again, as you come in, our product that we offer up is not giving somebody simply access to keys to deploy into Cloud Foundry. We give you the pipeline. So we also try to make a lot of those pipelines as easy and consumable as possible. We don't want to have people worrying about trying to figure out all the intricacies of getting something published into an artifact repository and making sure that everything that they've done has kind of met potential audit and attestation needs in the future. A big part of what we're providing is a way for development teams to not have to worry about that because it's built into the platform. We've done a few things here as well around needs for separation of duty. It's something that we still have to deal with on a daily basis. A developer is not somebody who could introduce a single line code of change and also promote it into production. So we've built into the platform kind of the RBAC, role-based access control. Again, so it's just something that's built into the platform. And as you do this, we're not kind of doing continuous deployments. There are kind of those stage gates. So you do have to have that transformation and teams writing tests. You do have to have a team that's actually somewhat co-located and working together. So in the case that I showed you earlier, it was somebody who did the deployment who was sitting on the opposite side of the table from the developer who wrote the change, and they simply said, hey, is this good to go? Look at it. Okay, that person, the product manager presses the button and it deploys into production. Without that type of thing, you certainly cannot get the rapid feedback loops. So what does this really mean to a developer? There sounds like there's definitely some restrictions put here on what the developer can do. And anytime you kind of put restrictions on the developer, that you really need to have some way to balance that out with much more value add that you're getting out of it on the other end, because you want to empower developers. You want them to be happy. You don't want them to be looking at your platform as something that restricts them from doing what they need to do. So I mentioned that Liberty Forge pipelines, our delivery platform, are the only way to get into Cloud Foundry. And they effectively act as the API into the platform. So we have patterns in which you put everything in Cloud Foundry manifests. So if you need to change anything, it simply goes into that manifest file. We have conventions in which they can simply push those changes in. They have full control over whatever they do once that pipeline has been provisioned for them. There are a few other things that really have to come into play from an operational perspective. Your apps are now effectively 100% immutable. If you need to make any changes, those have to be pushed back the whole way through the pipeline, which is a good thing, but it's also something that, especially looking at where a lot of people have come from, wasn't always frowned upon to go SSH into some server and tweak some config file somewhere. So we also look at how can we provide tools to make that easier. So we do provide some things like simple start, stop, restart capabilities, things that really are some of the few things you actually need to run or operate in Cloud Foundry. And we also bake in a lot of the tooling that you might need otherwise and make it easily consumable. So what I mean by that is automatically configured logging and metrics and so on. So really what it looks like is if I need to make a change, configuration goes into source code or goes into version control. Your app goes into version control, a git push, and your pipeline fires, and that's kind of our API into the platform. Something that we're really kind of experimenting it with at this point is we treat everything like that. Kind of mentioned at the beginning, it's infrastructure, it's apps, it's services, whatever that might mean. So when we look at services that are managed within the platform, we're actually looking at kind of a service push. So we define, this is kind of a custom manifest format for our services that define anything that you need in that service. So when you go to provision that service, you check this into source control and push it through the pipeline. And the reason we do this is because services have a life cycle effectively just like applications do as well. And when we talk about a lot of that need for visibility into everything that's happened, if you can push all of that through a pipeline, you have that full end-to-end over the life cycle of the service transparency into what you've done. So I mentioned this is kind of experimental at this point. One, because there's not a lot of services at the moment that have sophisticated configuration kind of in the Cloud Foundry world. And also some of the service brokers today are not as kind of declarative or idempotent when they do provide parameters. So you may have something that on initial provisioning has a different JSON structure than on updating, which is not optimal for this kind of model. So it's something to keep in mind. So from a security perspective, especially as you look at cloud deployments where things are much more interconnected network of APIs, you have to talk to things. You have to talk to your databases. Security is of utmost importance, but we also don't want it to be a blocker. So we've actually built some services and systems on top of Cloud Foundry that provide what we'd call kind of a policy-based approach to managing application security groups. So application security groups are a mechanism built into Cloud Foundry which allow you to provide egress controls for your container on outbound access. So what we've done is provided kind of a policy-based mechanism that we know what business unit you may be part of. We know if you're non-prod versus production. We know different security categories such as internal versus external. And then we can apply some standard access control to your application or to your space in Cloud Foundry. So you don't necessarily, by default, if you're doing something standard, that will just come for you. And we've automated things like space creation and org management. So the system is actually doing that and can automatically apply these rules. And the other thing that this does is allow us to have a consistent view for application developers across all of our Cloud Foundry instances. So I mentioned before we have 3 instances in our 3 different locations in our domestic data centers, AWS deployments coming online. We want to have something that when somebody goes and deploys something, or if they need to deploy in multiple locations, or if they're maybe moving it from one location to the other, we want it to kind of be the principle of least surprise. So we actually have ways that we can synchronize all of these kind of policy-based security groups across those different locations as well. So it's still, there's some things in AWS that make this a little bit more difficult in terms of mapping security, application security groups to AWS security groups. And we've also provided a set of tools so people can kind of figure out if connectivity is blocked by, say, a firewall or an application security group or so on and so forth. But I think this is something that has given the security teams a lot of comfort in knowing that we have these controls in place and they're very 100% automated and consistent, but the app teams can move faster because it's automatically put in place for them. The other thing I mentioned a little bit before is the impacts to the developer. So we can, I briefly mentioned that we kind of control all of the management and provisioning of things like orgs and spaces. So as part of that, what we do is we provide a lot of common services out of the box so that app teams have to figure out how do I get my syslog configured to go to this specific log aggregation service, or how do I figure out what the license keys are so we can hook in our APM monitoring solution. So anytime a new space is provisioned, automatically we create services for giving them access to different logging providers, centralized logging providers. And we actually have set those up so that they flow through a system that does log enrichment. And we add additional data. For those of you familiar with Cloud Foundry, there's a lot of GUIDs and other things that are involved that can make it very hard for application teams coming in to find their logs when you send them into a centralized logging provider. So what we've done is done log enrichment over top of that to add things like org space and app name that makes sense for the developers. We've also kind of tried to bridge the gap between the new and the old world, and have built some encryption services that allow teams to manage credentials and check into their code, credentials that are basically the ciphertext, which removes us from being kind of a central bottleneck of having to manage credentials in environment variables. It's kind of a little bit of a bending of the third of the 12 factors in terms of how we've managed configuration, but it's provided us a bridge effectively so that we can provide self-service, but still have a way to manage sensitive information such as passwords and other things for services that are managed outside of the platform. So one of the things I think is really important is kind of when you go down this path of especially building cloud native applications moving into the cloud, is that you really should be building and operating for that cloud native environment. You need to move into that and adopt that model holistically. But at the same time, in a large enterprise, you're going to have to coexist with a very diverse legacy ecosystem. And that may be things from a technology perspective, and that may mean things from an operational perspective, from a process perspective, from a cultural perspective. So there are aspects of that you really are going to have to bridge. One of those things for us has been change management. And I think traditionally, as you look at change management, and going through change boards and having to get long lead times on making any changes, clearly that is not at all conducive to getting into production in just a few minutes. So what we have done is kind of looked at what are some options that we can do to live within this world. It is something, we have systems, APIs that are integrating across this new cloud world with our legacy systems. There's no way we could just kind of cut the cord and say, hey, here's this new world over here that is completely separate from this old world. So from an ITIL or ITSM perspective, the concept of a standard change is something that actually fits quite well into this model. If you look at what continuous delivery pipelines do, they're well known. We do the same thing over and over again. It's a totally standardized automated procedure. It's been predefined ahead of time, and it's relatively risk-free, especially when you take into account things like zero downtime, blue-green deployments, and the amount of testing and visibility you get into it. So what we've worked with our change management teams and application teams is around getting standard changes for any application or for applications going into Cloud Foundry. And because we have a lot of templates and patterns that we follow as new teams come in, and that pipeline is the API into the platform, in many cases we've been able to raise that to a portfolio level. So if you have a lot of microservices being actively developed, every time you have a new service, you don't want to have to go through this process of achieving a standard change. But because everything starts to look a lot more similar from a pipeline perspective, you can actually raise that up a bit from to a portfolio level. And then what we do is on production deployments, we've baked directly into the pipeline. One of the steps on a production deployment is to open a standard change when the deployment starts and close that standard change when the deployment finishes. And it means the app teams actually never have to interact with that change management system, and everything is just automatically there. But we're still working within the bounds of that existing ecosystem. So I've been talking a lot about apps and things in Cloud Foundry. This is a process that we've been really putting in place for everything. Anything kind of going into new cloud direction. So if we look at the way we manage Cloud Foundry itself, we actually take those same exact principles and apply them to managing the platform itself. And we use those same exact principles actually to manage lower level things in AWS, such as our VPCs and subnet creations and everything from the ground up of creating a brand new VPC and everything that goes into it all flows through pipelines. And even in the case of something like PCF, which is a multi-tenant environment used across all of our business units, we've even been able to get a standard change approved for changes in that environment, just to the the reproducibility of everything we do because of the full automation. So it's definitely, as we look at where we're headed, we've had a lot of teams, a significant number of teams who have really been able to build on top of this. Again, this is really an enabling platform. If you don't combine this with changes in the way that the application teams work and the broader culture around them, it's just an enabling platform. Nothing has changed much. So we definitely have some teams who have been taking advantage of this. What we're really interested in doing now is making this much more mainstream. So that's a big focus of what we're doing right now. And we are also looking at making this whole platform much more self-service. We've focused a lot more to date on, well, once we give you that pipeline, how do we make it as easy as possible? Right now, we're going to try to make it as easy as possible for you to get the pipeline in the first place, to make that completely self-service. And that goes back to the idea of you should be able to now go from idea to production as fast as possible, not just commit to production. And as I mentioned before, we're trying to apply this everywhere. Again, not just apps. We're trying to apply it to platforms and ultimately all of our infrastructure and everything that is done in that place. So we're looking at how we start to mature those other areas as well as one of our major focuses as we move forward. And again, kind of want to reiterate, it's not something that kind of happens overnight. As we've been working through a lot of gaining the trust of teams like audit and security, these are kind of conversations that have occurred over long periods of time. And I think looking at how you gain that trust is just seeing and giving that transparency into your process. So with that said, I will take any questions. So the first question was if there are any manual steps in the pipeline, how do you handle that? So I think there's a couple places. One is that there's a lot of, I showed a very simple kind of pipeline up there and the high level stages. There are still, in a lot of cases, and rightfully so, you may be wanting to do exploratory testing, through your API or through your UI or something like that. Those things really fall into kind of where that test, stage is there. Ultimately that's going to be dictated by the speed of the developer checking something in and rolls over to the person who actually needs to do that exploratory testing and saying, hey, it's ready to go. Can you take a look at it? And they're actually aligned to do it right away. I think some of the other areas are around, we can't just roll it through from a continuous deployment perspective. We do have to have those stops before production, which we can ensure that there has been some form of separation of duty. We haven't done anything that is required, like in the middle of a blue-green deployment, to say like, hey, let's manually check something. Everything, our blue-green deployments, we've built in automated smoke testing in the middle. So it's not just, hey, the app started. It's like we actually execute some smoke tests. But we have no mechanism today that to support some type of manual interaction there. So it's been mostly moving kind of in that automated fashion. And the second question was around moving kind of some of the legacy in.
Some people are resistant to this kind of thing because of the comfort that the manual processes give them. How do you convince them or get them on board with a plan like this?
So I think one of the things is looking at and having kind of evangelists for the process, for the platforms, is one area where we've started to have some good luck. So you can get out there and get in front of people and show what some of these teams have done. And we've started to do kind of, show and tell type of workshops where people can drop in and we can, help them out. We've actually, as part of our internal hackathon series that we have across our company, we've actually used some of these technologies and platforms to showcase them. So while those are not necessarily, process and cultural things, you at least get some of the developers focused to the possibilities of what exist. But it's definitely a hard thing, and I think as you give more visibility into everything that goes on, and you can kind of walk through people everything that is there, you can start to build up a little bit of that trust. But at the same time, you're talking an end-to-end process, and most people are not used to seeing the end-to-end process. They're used to their little silo, so it can also be very overwhelming.
So with the large organization, how do you handle, say, the architectural guidance or oversight aspect of things? And then also, how do you manage all of the microservices within the organ spaces and making sure people are aware of them and all of that?
So I think that's something from a platform perspective, we've been maybe providing some tools, but we haven't been necessarily looking at kind of the broader architectural. When people deploy onto the platform, we've been treating it much more as a service offering, in which we say, on top of it, we define this well-defined API. You can consume it however you want, and we'll provide some additional tools. But we do consume the platform ourselves to deploy some of our automation and services. I think there's definitely some opportunity, especially from a services perspective, to integrate much more of a kind of like an API marketplace is something that we're actually actively working on. So not only how to get your APIs out there to run them, but actually how do you discover and consume them easily? It is something we're actively working on. I think I'm out of time, so I can take any questions in the back offline if you want. Yep.